here he is, my friend, the great Hank Goldberg. Hank, good morning, pal.
Hey, wow. Hey, you know how long I know Mike? When I used to work for Jimmy the Greek, I think he was, after I left Jimmy, Mike was next in line to work with the Greek and ghostwrite a lot of his stuff and help him prepare for his TV stuff. And so Mike and I go back a long way.
Well, I'll tell you something funny, Hank. I was on WFAN, celebrated their 25-year anniversary about a month ago, and Francesa was kind enough to bring me on. And on that program, that day, he brought on everybody, as you can imagine, Hank, Derek Jeter, Mark Messier, you name it, all the New York greats. And you got to mention that day, believe it or not.
I heard about it, yeah.
Yeah, him and Russo said that the one guest they could never, ever get was Joe DiMaggio. And Mike said, we did everything we could to get Joe D, including reaching out to Hank Goldberg. So, I mean, is that true? You try to help him out. You couldn't get him, huh?
Well, at that point, Joe was being protected by the attorney in Hollywood who wouldn't let anybody near him. But I was fortunate. I got Joe. And I still have the tape. I've got about 45 minutes of me and Joe. And after he passed away, they played it on ESPN radio, and it was phenomenal. I mean, Joe talking about, and my dad was there with us, and my dad was a columnist for a paper in Newark and covered Joe's whole career. And Joe loved my father, and he really opened up talking about how Lefty O'Doul told him to use a heavier bat in Yankee Stadium because of the power alleys. Talked about how they thought Joe had a bad knee, and they sent him to a doctor with the scout, Bill Essick. They put him on a table. There were no MRIs in those days, and Joe said the doctor whacked him across the knee so hard that he almost got up and hit him. And the doctor looked at Essick and he said, he'll play.
Though they were tougher back then, weren't they?
Yeah, I guess so.
Yep, 56 straight for Jody. Well, I do want to ask you this before we start talking about the Dolphins, and you and I spoke off the phone yesterday about the curse. Whether you want to be humble or not, you are the all-time best in this town, and there's been a big change, Hank. You know, you still work here at 640 on and off, and you're great on television on ESPN with the picks and the horse racing and all that. But you're not a daily host here anymore. Neil has passed away, so we've seen some of the greats not on anymore on a daily basis. There's been a changing of the guard. I'm not sure if it's good or bad. So I'm going to ask you, as the guy I deem as the best of all time. What do you think about Miami radio these days, specifically sports talk radio? Do you think it's gone in the dumper?
It's gotten younger, I'll say that. There are a lot of people who were on the air who, but remember, when I started, there weren't too many guys doing it. I think Joe Brown will tell you this. When they started doing sports talk from Super Bowls, it was Eddie Andelman, me, and a couple of guys from Los Angeles, and that was it.
Eddie Andelman, of course, from WEEI up in Boston. Great.
Yeah, and Krikorian from Los Angeles.
Right.
And I think we were the first three guys to do a sports show from radio. There was no Radio Row. There were the three of us. So, I went back a long way. And then, John Moynihan was started doing a daily talk show. But when I first started, Larry King was doing 2 nights a week of sports talk among his nightly shows on the old WIOD, and Sonny Hirsch was doing a show on WKAT, and Sonny was really the first guy who did a nightly sports talk show. And I used to sit in with Sonny occasionally, and then I went over to it was the Stewart station in town. Ken Malden was the program director, and Bob Sheridan was doing some sports over there. And I did Paul Warfield's show back in the perfect season, and was a stringer with them covering the '72 Dolphins. And that's how I got started. It was it seems like eons ago. And Paul and I did a show on Tuesday nights, and Nick Bonacani did a show with Sheridan. And that's how it all started for me. And then when Larry left to go on Mutual Daily, he suggested to the general manager there that he thought I'd be a good choice to succeed him, and maybe they ought to try doing sports 5 nights a week. And Bill Vine said, if I did a decent job with the sports talk, I could do the Dolphin games with Rick Weaver, and that's how it all got started for me.
And then FAN was already operating in New York, right? What year was that down here then?
When FAN started?
No, when you started, because FAN started in '87. So
I started in '75,
wow.
'76.
So you were way before that. How about that? Even before them.
Yeah.
So then, looking at the landscape when you started and all the great years you had down here, up until a couple of years ago at QAM, when you were still putting up great numbers and putting on great shows. What you see now, what you see today, you like it? I mean, do you find yourself, Hank, what I'm basically asking you is this. I know you like me, but when you're driving around town, are you compelled to listen to local sports talk radio, or are you like, no thanks?
I'm compelled to turn most of it off.
Yeah, I figured that.
You know what? When I listen to sports or even watch it, I'm looking at it so I can get information more than anything else. I like the good interviews, and I like to hear guys who, one of the things that I always prided myself on was trying to get it right, and I still dig for information when I'm on occasionally, or even when I do my ESPN stuff on Sunday mornings, or as a football reporter for them, and. I want to make sure. That was what my dad taught me. He said, whatever you do, make sure you've got it right. There's so many guys out there who are just throwing out stuff, and it irritates me when I hear people who just say things that they don't really know about, and they try to make it sound like it's fact. And that's the thing that irritates me the most. But now, there are a few guys that I still like who are on the air. I think you're very entertaining. Sometimes you irritate me with some of the stuff you do. But you know what? You're prepared, and I know you work. I can tell you work at it. I like your competition. He and I are good friends. I helped him get started over at WIOD years ago. Dan competed with me when he came on. Sometimes his show is good. And sometimes I think he misses, but like his columns, they're that way now. And it's different from today from what it used to be, because there are a lot of guys on there who I just don't know where they're coming from. I know they're not going out and getting stories firsthand. They don't face the people that they talk about. One thing about Shula, Shula. Used to have little respect for a lot of guys who were on there who were just saying things and wouldn't, come and face him afterwards.
Can't blame him for that. And not a bad trio you mentioned there, by the way, even with a little bit of criticism, which is probably fair. And me, Joe Rose, and Dan Le Batard. One more, and then we'll get to the Dolphins. Neil Rogers. There's some guy on Twitter. You're not on Twitter, are you, Hank?
No.
No. Okay, his name is the fake Tom Jicka, and I don't know who the guy is, but he loves you. He loves you. He loves Neil. He loves all the guys. And for some reason, he's been badgering me and my whole staff for 2 days. Please, when you bring on Hank Goldberg, have Hank say something about the late, great Neil Rogers. So to sum it up, as a guy that worked with Neil, you were friendly with Neil, how would you sum up Neil Rogers?
Well, there were I think 3 Neil Rogers. When I first started listening to Neil, he was on a competitive station, and he was on at night, and he was brilliant. And he was talking about local politics, and he had an agenda, and nobody did it better than Neil. And then he came over to join our station, and he was uproariously funny, and he changed his entire style, and the audience grew beyond anybody's expectations. Nobody will ever duplicate the numbers that Neil generated, and he was a phenom. He just but at that point in time, there were other people who started to do shock radio, and I think Neil, he was doing it before the guys in New York started to emerge or any place else. And he I think, kind of pioneered that, and got away with a lot of stuff. And he had people coming out of the woodwork trying to stop him, and nothing stopped him. And he had the guts to to persevere with that. And then there was the third Neil who got a little tired, and the ratings started to slip somewhat.
Well, tired is really a nice. Tired is a nice way of saying it was a pissed off, aggravated, angry Neil who couldn't stand management.
You know what? I think when Neil left here, he lost the pulse of the area, and it didn't work. But you know something, Neil was a brilliant guy, and you know, for all the bluster he had, it was an act, and he wasn't that way. You know, I went and visited with him. I went up to do a racing event up in Toronto. I called him up, and we met for dinner out at the racetrack, and it was a Chinese buffet. And
you love those.
And I spent a couple hours with Neil, and you know, he was such a bright man, and you know, he and I had worked together for so long. He used to rip me on the air, and one time we had a real battle when we were both at WIOD. And I said something that really got to him, and he went to the general manager and told him he didn't want me talking about him anymore. And here this guy was, you know, tearing into me day after day.
Right.
But he didn't like it so much when I said something about him that hit home. And the general manager said, if it bothers you, you know, that he says things about you, don't listen to him. He says, I just turned him off when he comes on here. The general manager of the station said he didn't listen to him. And, you know, I'm very friendly with Sid Levin, who used to be the general manager at WKAT when Neil first came to town. And the lady who owned that station, her name was Katzenstein. She was an older woman, very conservative lady. And one day, Neil came in to Sid, who ran the station, and said, I'm coming out. Sid had no idea what he was talking about. And he said, what do you mean? He said, I'm going to declare myself, you know, I'm gay.
Right.
And Sid called Mrs. Katzenstein and kept her on the phone for 3 hours while Neil was on the air, so she wouldn't hear it. But, you know, Neil was a giant. You can't take away from him what his accomplishment was.
Nope.
And, you know, when Neil first came to work at IOD, when I was there, you know, I called him. And, you know, Neil once told Tom Chicka, and he wrote it, that he thought I was his favorite radio personality other than himself. And I called him and thanked him. And I was being suspended at the time, and one of my few suspensions. Right. I think you took the lead in that department, but I used to hold that record. And, yeah. And I got suspended because I said that this was a Bush League town because nobody showed up to see Miami play Penn State, which I couldn't believe. And the general manager said I couldn't say that. I said, I can say that. It's true.
Right.
And I was out for a few days. And so Neil said that. I called Neil and thanked him. And he said, why don't you come on the air with me? And I went down and was a guest on his show. And we really hit it off. And I thought, you know, this guy was an amazing talent, and and I'll always believe that about him because he was, and you know, we always got along after everything was said and done.
Yeah, and we miss him. There's no question about it. He was an amazing talent, and it was kind of sad the way it all ended for Neil Rogers. God rest his soul. Yeah, Hank Goldberg, the greatest, in my opinion, the greatest sports talk show host in the history of this town. Still doing it, by the way, and doing a terrific job on ESPN, especially football season. So you mentioned the fact that you covered the Dolphins, and they're celebrating that 40-year anniversary this year, Hank, of that undefeated team back in 1972. We had a wonderful 20 minutes on this program yesterday with the Hall of Fame quarterback Bob Greasy. What do you, besides the obvious, which is they're still the only unbeaten team, all the great Bradshaw teams and Staubach teams and Montana and all those great teams never got it done. So besides the obvious, they're still the only undefeated team. What do you take away from that season, Hank, that you covered so closely 40 years ago?
Well, I just wrote a piece about it for Dolphin Digest, and I said that that season really started the year before. I'll never forget being in that locker room after they lost to Dallas and talking to some of those players. And I can remember Tim Foley in particular saying that we learned something. And the year before, they really raised hell in New Orleans. You know, they were out at night in the French Quarter, and there was a lot going on. And I remember some of the guys came back to the hotel. We stayed at a place called the Fontainebleau, which was a dump on the outskirts of New Orleans. It doesn't stand anymore. That
same? I would imagine the same owners as the Fontainebleau down here.
No connection.
Wow.
And,
okay.
And it was like a motel, and somebody brought some girls back to the hotel, and there were three of them, and guys were coming to different rooms, and one of the broadcasters was hosting a party in his room, and the next morning he had to go interview Shula, and he had his tape recorder with him, and he walked in the suite where Shula was, and the first thing Shula said to him was, "How come you don't invite me to your party?" And the guy almost fell over. He was, he had no idea what to say at that point. And but it was so loose, and I don't think they really appreciated the opportunity they had, and they were remorseful. And to a man, they said they will never let that opportunity slip by again, and they really rededicated themselves after they lost that game to Dallas, and they were determined. I don't think they figured they were going to go undefeated, but they approached that next season virtually with menace in their hearts, and they went out and just kept winning, and it just no, they never talked about being undefeated, and this town, I hear people talking about the Heat and the excitement about the Heat, but the Heat situation is so much different from what those guys were. In that the Heat team, they're like rock stars. Nobody really knows those guys unless you go to Prime 112 on a Wednesday night. You don't see those guys around town. Really, they keep to themselves, and they're icons, and certainly they deserve the adulation that they get. They're a phenomenal team. But those Dolphins were everywhere. Like I would go to a place in Coconut Grove, and maybe it's 1 o'clock in the morning on a Friday night, and I'd see Jake Scott in the men's room, and he'd say, "You didn't see me here," But
right.
But they were everywhere around town, and the town really embraced them to a degree like I've never seen. And it was spontaneous. When we would come back from a road trip, you couldn't get to the airport because there'd be thousands of people there to meet the team, and they were loved by everybody. And guys like Zonka and Kick and Mark Fleming, and that it didn't matter. They were just idols, and everybody jumped on board that bandwagon. And it was the Heat situation was a little bit different from what that team. And to this day, people worship that team for what it accomplished. But it was really something to be around when it was happening. And then, of course, they went out the next year, and they were even better.
Yeah, won it again. And just we have about a minute to go here, Hank. But just to fast forward that, by the way, Jake Scott, of course, the MVP of that 14-7 victory over the Washington Redskins.
Should not have been, by the way.
I agree.
Manny with the 17 tackles was amazing.
No doubt about it. Should have been Fernandez. I agree with you. But fast forwarding it 40 years now, Hank. You and I talked about this yesterday. Already this training camp, Chad Johnson arrested and cut, Cameron Wake in a car accident, Garrard gets hurt, the team hasn't won in a decade, Ireland, me and you both agree, seemingly a nice guy, can't get it done. And you said the word yesterday on the phone to me, curse. It almost seems that way, yes?
He should be called Joe Blitzvik, the old Abner character with the cloud over his head. Everything he touches goes wrong. And I'll say one thing real quickly about the coach. I think he acted a little prematurely. Even Jimmy Johnson said that he thought that Chad should have been cut a little bit of slack. And the one hypocrisy of it all is when the coach says about Dansby's comments on your show that those things should be kept in-house, what the hell is he doing on primetime television firing Chad Johnson that way?
Well, I don't think that was Philbin's choice. I think that was the organization. I mean, he looked very uncomfortable to me. Don't you think, Hank?
Hey, he bought into it.
Yeah.
And he wore the microphone.
Yeah. Yeah, true. You're right. You got to preach it, right? You got to walk the walk. Well, listen, I love you, and you've always been there for me, always from day one. You know that, Hank. And
yes. Well, I got to tell you something. You and Scotty. Scotty. Was my all-time greatest producer, you guys, when you came along, I could tell where you were going I've had some great guys work with me, Boog Shambi and Wischusen. I've got a nice tree.
Please include Mark Eisenberg. He's sitting to my left. He's going to start to cry, Hank.
Oh, yeah, Izzy.
Oh, yeah. But yes, go ahead. Go ahead. But me and Scotty, yeah, you've had some great guys work alongside, no doubt.
Yeah, yes. Well, Izzy's still producing.
I've gone far, huh?
I haven't checked his bank book lately. But
let's put it this way: my bank book says the same amount of runs the Marlins have gotten in the last 3 games.
Who's going to win first, the Marlins or the Dolphins?
Oh, that's a very good question. That's a good question. Well, we've won today by having you here. I can tell you that.
Thanks, Sid.
And we'll see you soon, Hank.
Okay, all the best to you.
Thank you.
Keep it going.
You too. Take care. The great Hank Goldberg.